seen as the bare minimum to make sure that there's safe spaces for everyone.
So without this, so many students could just be in danger.
Not allowing students to just be who they are is something that, it's not a policy, it's not a political standpoint, it's people's lives.
Policy 713. It's not the most exciting name out there, but it's the reason thousands of students in New Brunswick have been walking out of their classrooms to protest.
We are proud! Couldn't be prouder! If you can't hear us, yell a little louder!
There's deep skepticism over what the government intends to change about how kids live their lives at school. There's dissent within the Premier's own cabinet and questions about why the Premier would even dare to think about changing Policy 713.
Since I recently changed my name to Sade, Policy 713 ensures that my name and my pronouns should be used in my school setting.
Okay, so what is Policy 713? Well, it's a set of guidelines that came into effect in New Brunswick in 2020, setting out minimum requirements for schools to be safe, welcoming, inclusive, and affirming environments for LGBTQ students. What does that mean? Well, it means things like not using homophobic language, making sure transgender kids have the right washroom access, and letting them take part in the extracurriculars, as with sports, that match their gender. It's all stuff that had pretty broad support until years later, there suddenly wasn't. About a month ago, the group helping implement this policy, training teachers, for example, suddenly had its funding cut. The explanation, the policy was now officially under review. At around the same time, there were even people who had protested some of these training sessions. There seemed to be some backlash now that the rubber was hitting the road. But how much opposition was there, really? Well, that's where this gets interesting. The Premier has been very vague about the exact nature of any complaints there might have been, or even how many of them there are. In the hundreds, he says. But when CBC asked Education Minister Bill Hogan directly why the government was being so opaque about what triggered the review, he replied simply, "It's not my place to divulge private communication with me." The province's child and youth advocate even asked government to send any and all correspondence that might have led to this policy review. He got back 3 emails.
Could I ask the Minister to commit to tabling a full inventory and report on the complaints received?
The Minister of Education, Early Childhood Development.
Thank you, Chair. I'd invite the member, if she wants to see what I've received, then she's certainly welcome to submit an RTI.
So it's a bit weird, right? Like first, that a policy would be reviewed so quickly after it was first implemented, but then to be so dodgy on how much backlash there really is. Why wouldn't you just redact names and then just show it all? Now, New Brunswick's Premier, Blaine Higgs, says there's one part of the policy that they're most concerned about. The section that allows transgender and non-binary students to choose their own names and pronouns without parental consent, but also that parents shouldn't even be notified of any name change without student consent. So if Alice wants to be Bobby, not only should teachers agree without asking mom and dad, they shouldn't even tell mom and dad unless Bobby says yes.
Oh, I think for purposely to be hidden from the parents, there's a problem with that. Okay. You're here questioning that a parent should have no right to know. I mean, that's kind of hard concept to grasp in the real sense.
A lot of parents say they would want to know what's going on with their kid and that the school shouldn't keep secrets from them. But advocates say protecting kids should come first.
Many of them have homophobic or transphobic parents, and that could just be because they're uneducated, but those kids don't feel safe at home, and they come to school to have 7 or 8 or 9 hours of feeling safe.
My point here is we should listen to parents. We should listen to parents.
Even homophobic parents and transphobic parents?
I'm not distinguishing between one parent or another.
We're here to say the bare minimum that this policy is saying is they need to have gender-neutral bathrooms, that we're using the proper pronouns for kids, and that the kids have support in the school.
And I should point out, the Higgs government isn't acting on this with, one clear, unanimous voice. Even some members of cabinet, at least 7 by our count, aren't convinced that the policy needs changing.
When government decides to talk about reviewing items that those communities have fought so hard to protect themselves or to feel that they're in a safe place, it does create an amount of fear that makes me anxious as well.
But the review is going ahead, which means changes could be in store. So to help us understand what's going on and what could happen next, we brought in Hadil Ibrahim. Hadil, you're a reporter with CBC New Brunswick, and you know this story inside out, so thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, of course. So Hadil, let's start with this. What is it about the review that so many people find so threatening?
That's a fair question because a policy review is not uncommon. I think the issue here is twofold. The first one is that this policy is so basic and boilerplate that some people are worried that any change would harm kids' rights.
It could lead to kids not wanting to go to school and like dropping out and things like that. The need for a safe space and comfort and just feeling like they can belong somewhere is very important to children's growth, and it's the nurture that they need.
And the second issue is that all of the reasons that the Premier and the Minister have cited as a reason for the review have been from the perspective of non-trans people. So this idea of protecting cisgender girls in washrooms from trans kids and protecting the fairness of sports and protecting the rights of parents to know about any name changes. So it's those two things together are causing the concern.
Right, but I guess as you said, I mean, things have been so vague up until this point, to the point where we don't actually know what changes are coming through. So tell me this, like what's the range of change that we might see once this review process actually wraps up?
Yeah, it could be anything from changing the definition of what LGBTQ is, so kind of like expanding that definition, or it could be excluding trans girls from girls' washrooms and only allowing them to use gender-neutral washrooms. So it's a range, and we don't have a lot of information.
But what are you saying though, that I guess that, like, once the review is done, that either Premier Higgs or the government or the minister in charge could just kind of unilaterally change the policy without it, I don't know, going into some kind of consultation or some other process?
Yeah, that's right. Policy is not legislation, so there's no need for a vote. This policy was passed by the former minister, and the education minister has the prerogative to start a review and change the policy based on information that he finds. He can have some consultation with people, so we know that the current minister has been inviting people to speak to caucus, but he hasn't invited the New Brunswick Teachers Association, for example. Key LGBTQ rights groups haven't been invited either. And so they're concerned about kind of what decisions are being made without them being included.
We have not received any information about how the review will occur, who will be called to the table. We await the opportunity, and certainly we would hope that the goal of the review would be to actually strengthen it.
Do we know anything about the timeline? So we know that the review has been ongoing, right, for a number of weeks now, but it's kind of all been going on behind closed doors in a way. So once we know the outcome, like when will that be for starters, and maybe what are we expecting along those lines?
Yeah, so the department has given us an idea, and it's that they're expecting the results to be out in the first week of June. So it could be this week or next week, I guess. And in terms of what might happen, I mean, there has been a lot of protest of this review to begin with. So depending on what the results are, people might not be happy about it. And also, there are issues here that have to do with human rights. So, you know, the right for a child to use, or a trans person, any trans person, to use a washroom of their choice is protected by the Human Rights Act.
The New Brunswick Human Rights Code and I believe the federal one and the Nova Scotia one and probably many others do recognize gender expression now as a ground of discrimination. So you can't discriminate based on gender expression. And therefore, at least as a starting point, providing a washroom as a basic facility that is in line with that gender expression seems the right thing to do.
So then some legal issues might come into play. Also, 7 MLAs have come out in support of this policy and have said, some of them have said that this policy should only be strengthened and not weakened. So depending on what happens, and especially since MLAs can't vote, they might have to either walk back their words or step down.
Okay, so maybe another opportunity for you and I to speak. Hadil Ibrahim, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.